Forgotten Emissaries, the untold tale of the Blue Wizard's perilous missions in the East. Chapter 1, The Arrival. In the waning light of the Second Age, a tempest of sapphire radiance erupted across the firmament, heralding the arrival of two enigmatic figures. The Ezio Maelstrom coalesced into corporeal form, revealing Alatar and Pallando, Maiar chosen by the Valar for a perilous mission. Their feet touched the untamed soil of Rhûn, and the wind of the east caught their cerulean robes. The air crackled with arcane energy, and the very earth seemed to tremble beneath their feet.
Can you feel it, brother? The taint that permeates this land? It's as if the very air we breathe is thick with malevolence.
Indeed. Sauron's corruption runs deep, like poison in the very veins of the earth. We have our work cut out for us, old friend.
Their eyes, ancient and wise, surveyed the rugged landscape before them. Jagged peaks pierced the horizon, their snow-capped summits obscured by ominous clouds that roiled and churned like a sea of darkness. Vast, untamed forests sprawled in every direction, their depths harboring secrets both wondrous and terrible. The wind carried whispers of forgotten lore and echoes of battles long past.
We must tread carefully. The path ahead is fraught with peril, and our enemies are numerous and cunning.
Agreed. Let us begin our journey and unravel the threads of darkness that bind these lands. Time is not our ally in this endeavor.
The Blue Wizards set forth, their staves striking the earth in perfect rhythm, each step leaving a faint, luminescent trace that quickly faded. They traversed treacherous mountain passes where the air grew thin and bitter cold, nipped at their flesh with icy fan. Sheer cliffs loomed on either side, their faces etched with the cruel history of ages past, a testament to the unforgiving nature of this wild realm.
Look there, Pallando, vast through the mountains. It seems our path forward reveals itself.
Narrow and treacherous, we'd best...
A bone-chilling howl cut through the air, echoing off the canyon walls with primal ferocity. Dark shapes emerged from crevices in the rock, eyes gleaming with predatory intent. The stench of decay and wet fur filled the air, a harbinger of the danger that approached.
Wards, stand ready. These foul beasts shall not deter us from our quest.
The wizards stood back to back, their staves glowing with eldritch power that pulsed in time with their heartbeats. The wargs circled, saliva dripping from yellowed fangs, muscles coiled and ready to spring. In a blur of motion, the beasts attacked, their howls splitting the air. Alatar's staff flashed, and a wall of blue flame erupted between them and their assailants, its heat searing the very stone. Pallando muttered words of power, ancient syllables that seemed to twist reality itself, and the very stones beneath the warg's feet shifted and buckled, throwing the creatures off balance.
We cannot linger here. Pass quickly before they regroup and attack anew.
They dashed through the narrow gap, loose stones clattering beneath their feet like a cascade of bones. Behind them, the wargs' howls of frustration faded into the distance, replaced by the whistle of wind through the mountain crags. The wizards emerged on the other side, chests heaving from the exertion, their robes dusted with the grime of their passage.
That was but a taste of the dangers we'll face. We must remain vigilant, for our true foes are far more insidious.
Indeed, and I fear the servants of the enemy will prove far more cunning than mere beasts.
We must sharpen our wits as well as our magic. Their journey continued, leading them to the banks of a raging river that cut through the landscape like a liquid blade. Its waters roared with unbridled fury, swollen by the melting snows of distant peaks. Massive boulders jutted from the frothing current, offering a treacherous path across, each one slick with spray and treacherous moss.
We must ford this torrent. Are you ready, old friend? This crossing will test our mettle as surely as any foe.
As I'll ever be after you, Alatar. Your grace has always exceeded mine in such matters.
Alatar stepped onto the first boulder, his balance perfect despite the slick surface. His robes whipped about him in the wind, generated by the rushing waters. Pallando followed, his movements more cautious, each step carefully considered. Halfway across, a deafening crack split the air, drowning out even the roar of the river. The boulder beneath Pallando's feet shifted, threatening to topple and cast him into the merciless current.
Pallando, hold fast.
With lightning reflexes honed over millennia, Alatar's hands shot out, grasping Pallando's robes in a grip of iron. For a heart-stopping moment, they teetered on the brink of disaster, the hungry waters below seeming to reach up with foam-flecked fingers. Then, with a surge of strength that belied his mortal form, Alatar pulled his companion to safety, both of them collapsing onto a larger, more stable rock.
My thanks, brother. It seems the very elements conspire against us. Your swift action has saved me from a most undignified bath.
All the more reason to press on. We must find allies in this hostile land, for we cannot hope to succeed alone.
As they ventured deeper into Rune, the landscape gradually shifted from craggy mountains to rolling steppes. Here they encountered the first of many Easterling tribes, warriors adorned in intricate armor of lacquered leather and bronze, wielding curved blades that glinted in the harsh sun, eyed the strangers with suspicion and hostility. Their faces were weathered by wind and sun, eyes narrowed beneath heavy brows.
Halt! Who dares trespass on the lands of the Variags? Speak quickly, strangers, or taste the steel of our blades.
We come in peace, seeking only knowledge and understanding. Our purpose here is not conquest, but enlightenment.
The chieftain's eyes narrowed further, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword. Tension crackled in the air like lightning before a storm, and the assembled warriors shifted restlessly, awaiting their leader's command.
Perhaps a demonstration of our goodwill is in order, a gift, if you will, to show our peaceful intentions.
With a subtle gesture that seemed nothing more than a flourish of his robes, Pallando caused the campfire before them to flare brilliantly. The flames danced and shifted, taking on the shapes of majestic beasts and heroes of legend. A great eagle soared through the fire, followed by a charging olifant. The flickering silhouette of a mighty warrior brandished a sword against a serpentine dragon. The Easterlings gasped in awe, their hostility momentarily forgotten as they watched the display with childlike wonder.
What manner of men are you? No simple travelers command the flames thus.
We are not men, but emissaries from the West. We bring wisdom and the power to resist the encroaching darkness that threatens to engulf these lands.
The chieftain's expression softened, curiosity replacing suspicion. He stroked his beard thoughtfully, eyes darting between the two wizards and the still dancing flames.
Speak then, strangers. Tell us of this wisdom you claim to possess. What darkness do you speak of, and how can mere words hope to combat it?
And so began a pattern that would repeat itself countless times in the years to come, through displays of subtle magic that amazed without overwhelming, and words of profound insight that resonated with the deepest fears and hopes of those who heard them. Alatar and Pallando gradually earned the trust of key clan leaders throughout Rune. They spoke of unity in the face of division, of the strength found in forging one's own path rather than bowing to distant powers. Their words were seeds planted in fertile soil, waiting to sprout into the force that could stand against the growing shadow.
The time has come for us to part ways, my friend. I shall establish a sanctuary in the Oricani Mountains, a bastion against the growing shadow. There we can gather those who would resist and teach them the ways of power and wisdom.
And I shall walk among the courts of kings, planting seeds of resistance where Sauron's influence has taken root. Through whispers and counsel, we shall turn the tide of this war before it has even begun.
With a final clasp of hands, a gesture that conveyed millennia of friendship and shared purpose, the blue wizards separated, each embarking on their own perilous path. Alatar journeyed deep into the Oricani range, seeking a hidden valley spoken of in ancient legends. After weeks of arduous travel, scaling peaks and traversing hidden piles, he found it, a natural fortress nestled between towering peaks, protected from prying eyes by swirling mists and treacherous approaches.
Here, I shall build a refuge for all who would stand against the darkness, a place of learning, of power, and of hope.
Meanwhile, Pallando made his way to the opulent courts of Easterling kings. He adopted many guises, a wandering sage with eyes that hinted at unknowable deaths, a mysterious advisor whose whispered words could topple empires, a humble servant whose subtle actions shaped the course of history. In each role, he whispered words of caution and counsel, slowly turning hearts and minds against Sauron's subtle manipulations.
Tell me, wise one, of the power that grows in the West. Should we not align ourselves with it? Surely to stand against such might is folly.
Power built on domination and fear is as fragile as a tower of sand. True strength comes from unity and the will to chart one's own destiny. The choice before you is not one of submission or destruction, but of forging a new path, one that leads to true greatness.
And so, as the Second Age drew to a close, the Blue Wizards laid the foundations for a resistance that would span millennia. Their names would be forgotten by many, fading into legend and myth, but their deeds would echo through the ages, a bulwark against the encroaching night. In hidden valleys and torch-lit halls, in whispered conversations and rousing speeches, the seeds of defiance took root. The Great War against Sauron would be fought not just in the West, but in the hearts and minds of the East, guided by two figures in azure robes who moved like shadows through the pages of history. Chapter 2, The Struggle. The sands of time flowed like an inexorable river, carrying with it the weight of centuries. In the vast expanse of Rhûn, where the sun rose with a fierce intensity unknown to the West, two azure-clad figures waged a war unseen by mortal eyes. Alatar and Pallando, the Blue Wizards, had become as much a part of the landscape as the towering Orocani mountains themselves.
The time has come, my friend. We must separate to cover more ground.
Indeed, the shadow grows longer with each passing day. May your journey be fruitful and your steps guided by wisdom.
With a final nod, the two Istari parted ways, each embarking on a path that would shape the fate of Middle-earth. Alatar ascended the treacherous slopes of the Orocani, his staff leaving a trail of faint blue light in his wake. The mountain winds whipped at his robes, carrying with them the scent of pine and snow.
Here, in the heart of stone and sky, we shall build our sanctuary.
And build he did, over decades, then centuries. Alatar's mountain refuge transformed into a hidden citadel of knowledge and power. Carved into the very rock of the mountain, its winding corridors and vast chambers became home to a select few, those with the potential to wield magic against the encroaching darkness.
Remember, young ones, magic is not a tool for domination, but a responsibility. We are the guardians of balance in a world teetering on the edge of chaos.
In the halls of the mountain sanctuary, disciples from across the east gathered, their eyes alight with the hunger for knowledge. Alatar moved among them, a figure of mystery and reverence, imparting arcane secrets whispered by the very stones of Arda. Meanwhile, far below in the sun-baked plains and bustling cities of the Easterling kingdoms, Pallando wove a tapestry of alliances so intricate it would have put the finest dwarvish craftsman to shame. His voice, soft yet compelling, echoed in the ears of kings and chieftains alike.
The threat from the west is but a shadow of the true danger. Look to your own borders, to the whispers in the dark. There lies your true enemy.
In dimly lit throne rooms and around crackling campfires, Pallando's words took root. Slowly, painfully, like a tree growing through solid rock, pockets of resistance began to flourish. Villages hidden in misty valleys became bastions of hope. Caravans crossing the vast steppes carried more than spices and silks. They bore messages of defiance against the Dark Lord's will. Yet for every victory claimed by the Blue Wizards and their allies, Sauron's forces seemed to claim two more. The Dark Lord's influence seeped into the land like a noxious fog, corrupting all it touched. In the courts of once proud kings, suspicion and paranoia reigned supreme.
Who can we trust when shadows lurk in every corner? Even our closest advisors may be agents of the enemy.
Sauron, ever watchful, sensed the threat growing in his eastern domains. With cold calculation, he dispatched his most cunning servants, sorcerers cloaked in darkness, assassins with blades dipped in venom, and silver-tongued emissaries bearing gifts of power and promises of glory. The game of cat and mouse began in earnest. Alatar and Pallando found themselves constantly on the move, always one step ahead of discovery. Secret passages and hidden ways became their highways, whispered passwords their currency.
We cannot linger here. They draw too close.
Agreed, but we've planted the seeds. They will grow with or without our presence.
Yet even as they evaded capture, the cost of their mission grew ever steeper. Faithful allies disappeared in the night, their fates unknown. Carefully cultivated networks of resistance crumbled under the weight of betrayal and fear. The Blue Wizards pressed on, their determination unyielding as the mountains themselves. Their greatest trial, however, was yet to come. In the shadowy corners of an easterling city, a sorcerer of terrible power rose to prominence. His name was Kamor, and upon his finger gleamed one of Sauron's lesser rings, a band of gold that pulsed with malevolent energy.
I've seen through your deceptions, Blue Ones. Your meddling ends now.
The sorcerer's words crackled with dark magic, setting in motion the chain of events that would lead to a confrontation of epic proportions. Alatar and Pallando, realizing the grave threat Kamor posed to everything they had built, knew they had no choice but to confront him directly. The stage for their final battle was set atop the highest peak of the Orocani, where the air was thin and the very rocks hummed with primordial power. As storm clouds gathered, tinged with an unnatural red glow, the three figures faced each other in a triangle of tension.
Fools, you think you can stand against the might of Sauron? I will crush you and deliver your broken bodies to my master.
Your master is nothing but a servant himself, Kamor. A pawn in a game far beyond your comprehension.
It is not too late. Cast aside that ring, and you may yet find redemption.
Kamor's response came in the form of a bolt of black lightning that split the sky. The battle that ensued was one of legend, though few would ever know of its occurrence. Spells of immense power clashed against each other, reshaping the very mountain beneath their feet. The air crackled with energy as ancient words of power were uttered for the first time in millennia. Alatar and Pallando moved in perfect synchronization, their centuries of partnership evident in every gesture and incantation. Yet Kamor, empowered by Sauron's ring, proved to be a formidable opponent. His dark magic corroded the very fabric of reality, threatening to unravel the blue wizard's carefully woven spells.
Brother, we must combine our strength. It's the only way.
Yes, but the cost, are you certain?
We have no choice for Middle-earth.
In a blinding flash of azure light, Alatar and Pallando joined hands, their staffs crossed. A surge of power unlike anything seen since the Elder Days erupted from their union. Kamor's screams of defiance turned to terror as he was engulfed in a maelstrom of pure magical energy. When the light faded and the dust settled, Kamor lay defeated, his ring nothing more than a twisted lump of metal. But the victory came at a terrible price.
Our identities, they know now.
Yes, Sauron will not rest until he hunts us down.
The two Istari gazed at each other, the weight of their exposed secret heavy upon their shoulders. In that moment, they knew that everything had changed. The clandestine war they had waged for centuries would now enter a new phase, one of open conflict and desperate gambles. As they descended from the mountain, leaving behind the scars of their greatest battle, Alatar and Pallando steeled themselves for the challenges ahead. Their true identities might have been revealed, but their resolve remained unshaken. The struggle against Sauron's influence in the east would continue, no matter the cost. Chapter 3, The Reckoning. The azure-robed figures stood atop the wind-swept peak, their eyes locked in a silent exchange that spoke volumes. The chill mountain air whipped around them, carrying the acrid scent of their recent battle.
Our anonymity is lost, old friend. We can no longer work from the shadows.
Indeed, the time for subtlety has passed. We must act boldly if we are to stem the tide of darkness.
Alatar's weathered face creased with determination, his silver hair gleaming in the fading light.
We must divide our forces. I shall journey to the farthest reaches of the east, beyond the ken of maps and lore. There lie artifacts of immense power, relics that could turn the tide in our favor.
A perilous quest, to be sure. While you seek these treasures, I shall remain and fortify our allies. The storm approaches, and we must be ready when it breaks.
The wizards clasped forearms, a gesture laden with centuries of shared struggle and unwavering friendship.
Lead the valor guide your steps, Pallando.
And may they light your path through unknown lands, Alatar.
As dawn broke, two companies set forth from the Orocani mountains. Alatar led his followers eastward, their forms soon swallowed by the rolling mists. Pallando watched them depart before turning his gaze westward, where storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Months stretched into years as Pallando labored tirelessly. He wove a tapestry of alliances among the easterling kingdoms, his words kindling the embers of resistance into roaring flames. In hidden valleys and mountain fastnesses, he trained warriors in forgotten arts, preparing them for the coming onslaught. One crisp autumn morning, a rider arrived at Pallando's sanctuary, his steed lathered and heaving.
My lord, war has erupted in the west. Gondor stands besieged, and Sauron's armies march forth from Mordor.
Pallando's eyes narrow. A flicker of blue fire dancing within their depth.
Then the hour is upon us. Sound the horns. Let every ally we've gathered know that the time has come to honor their oaths.
Across the vast expanse of Rhûn, battle cries echoed through mountain passes and across windswept plains. Easterling warbands loyal to Sauron found their paths blocked by determined resistance fighters. Skirmishes erupted along supply lines, ambushes decimated reinforcement columns, and fortified choke points became scenes of desperate last stand. Pallando moved like a wraith through the chaos, his staff blazing with eldritch light as he turned the tide of crucial engagements. Yet for every victory, the shadow of Mordor grew longer, and the wizard felt the weight of time pressing down upon him.
Hold fast, my friends. Every day we deny Sauron his eastern armies is another day Gondor might survive.
As the war raged on, whispers began to spread among both friend and foe, tales of a figure moving across the far eastern lands, wielding power that made the very earth tremble. Pallando's heart soared with hope, even as exhaustion etched deep lines into his face. Then, on a day when the sky boiled with unnatural storms, a lone figure crested the eastern horizon. Alatar had returned, but he was changed. His once azure robes now shimmered with otherworldly hues, and in his hands he bore artifacts of terrible beauty and awesome might.
My friend, I bring hope and a reckoning for the forces of shadow.
The reunion was brief, for hard upon Alatar's heels came the full might of Sauron's eastern legions. Countless Easterling warriors, fell beasts, and dark sorcerers descended upon the last bastion of resistance like a tide of nightmares given flesh. What followed was a battle that would reshape the very land itself. Alatar unleashed the power of his hard-won artifacts, calling down lightning from clear skies and opening chasms that swallowed entire battalions. Pallando's mastery of magic reached new heights as he wove spells of protection and devastation in equal measure. The clash of armies echoed across the Urukani mountains, each side driven to the very limits of endurance. As the sun began to set on the third day of unceasing combat, a palpable change rippled through the air. The Easterlings faltered, confusion spreading through their ranks.
What sorcery is this? Our Lord's voice. It's gone silent.
Alatar and Pallando shared a look of weary triumph. Far to the west, beyond their sight but not beyond their senses, they felt the collapse of Sauron's power.
It is done. The ring is destroyed.
And with it, Sauron's hold over these lands.
As the realization spread, the remaining Easterling forces threw down their weapons or fled into the wilderness. Victory, hard fought and dearly bought, belonged to the Blue Wizards and their allies. In the aftermath, as the dust of battle settled and the wounded were tended, Alatar and Pallando stood alone atop a hill overlooking the ravaged battlefield.
Our task is complete, old friend. Yet I find no joy in my heart, only a bone-deep weariness.
As do I. We have changed this land for better or worse, and it has changed us in turn.
The two Istari gazed at the rising sun, its golden rays slowly reclaiming the land from shadow. Without a word, they turned and began to walk, their forms gradually fading like mist before the morning light. In the years that followed, the names of Alatar and Pallando faded from memory in the west, their deeds unsung in the halls of the victorious. But in the east, around cook fires and in quiet corners, stories persisted of the blue sages who had defied the shadow. Tales of their wisdom, their courage, and their sacrifice were passed down through generation, a testament to the enduring power of hope in the face of darkness.